Hazel enters Gray's life like an unexpected storm, bringing change he never saw coming. But the closer he gets, the more he senses the fear hidden behind her gentle smile. Is she his salvation, or the storm that will consume him once again? Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone! 2 years had passed since Gray Westbrook lost his wife, but for him, it felt as if the colors of the world had faded away forever. Nothing shined anymore. Each day was a monotonous repetition of the week. Work, home, taking care of Ben. Everything felt mechanical. There was no longer room for emotion, much less for new connections. He had built a wall around himself, believing it was the only way to survive. Ben, a child 2 years old, was the only thread still connecting him to reality. But caring for a small child without the woman he loved was something Gray never imagined he would face alone. Now, he found himself in need of someone to care for the boy while he dedicated himself to his business empire. His days were spent in long meetings at his company and nights trying to attend to Ben. Although Gray loved his son, he knew he wasn't giving his best. Gray stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. In his hand, the whiskey glass reflected the amber light, but he felt no warmth as it slid down his throat. Nothing could warm him anymore. Outside, the doorbell rang. With a sigh, he adjusted the collar of his shirt and opened the door. Standing before him was a young woman with a shy yet sincere smile. "You must be Hazel," he said bluntly, leaving no room for small talk. "Yes, sir," she replied, a little nervous, but her voice carried a welcoming softness. He gestured for her to come in, and as she stepped over the threshold, there was something in the way she carried herself. A calmness that felt natural, yet carried a hidden sorrow, something he somehow recognized when he looked into her eyes. In the background, Maria, the housekeeper, hurried down the hall. "I've prepared the living room for Hazel's interview," she said with a kind smile. Gray nodded silently and led Hazel to the living room. As they passed through the spacious mansion, Hazel noticed the immaculate environment, maintained by a dedicated staff. Yet, she also sensed something more, a coldness. The place was beautiful, but devoid of life. The elegant details, expensive paintings, and carefully arranged pieces of art all seemed to fill a void that nothing material could replace. Gray invited her to sit as Maria brought in tea. "Ben is in the playroom," Gray said hesitantly. "He's a good kid." Hazel nodded, sensing the slight tension in his voice. When Gray led her to the playroom, she found an adorable little boy with curious eyes sitting on the floor, coloring blocks scattered around him. Hazel crouched down to his level, smiling gently. "Hi, Ben. Can I play with you?" she asked, extending one of the blocks to him. With a hesitant movement, the boy took the toy from her hand. Gray stood observing, arms crossed, his expression calm, but deep down, something stirred within him. Hazel seemed to have a natural connection with children. Hazel stayed for a few hours to observe Ben's routine. Maria helped her familiarize herself with the schedule, while Gray kept his distance, watching attentively but remaining removed. The following days passed with an almost monotonous calm, though not without progress. Every morning, Hazel arrived punctually and soon took charge of Ben. Gray, as usual, left early for work and returned late, keeping his interactions with Hazel strictly professional. Ben, however, blossomed under Hazel's care. The boy began to smile more, play with greater enthusiasm, and even asked for Hazel when she wasn't around. Gray couldn't ignore the effect that the new nanny was having on his son. As much as he tried to keep his distance, he couldn't help but notice. One night, Gray came home earlier than usual. As he stepped inside, he heard laughter coming from the living room. Curious, he followed the sound and saw Hazel sitting on the floor with Ben, both laughing as they played with toy cars. The sight of them, so joyful and carefree, filled Gray with a warmth he hadn't felt since his wife passed away. He stood there, watching for longer than he had intended, until Hazel noticed his presence. She quickly got to her feet, as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. I'm sorry, I didn't see you come in," she said, smoothing her hair. Gray gave a small smile. "No need to apologize. Ben seems to be having fun." Hazel smiled back. "He's an amazing boy." The following days brought many similar moments. Gray kept his distance, but he began allowing himself brief moments of observation, as if trying to understand what had changed in the house since Hazel arrived. Gradually, he realized that it wasn't just Ben who had changed. He had too. However, Hazel wasn't always entirely at ease. Gray noticed at times she grew quiet. He respected her privacy, but he couldn't help but wonder what was weighing on her mind. One day, while Hazel was in the kitchen with Maria discussing Ben's food preferences, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and her expressions immediately changed. As Gray walked past the room, he caught the exact moment her face turned pale. It was clear to him that something was wrong. Hazel declined the call without answering, but her fingers trembled slightly as she put the phone back in her pocket. Gray said nothing, but his eyes narrowed. He wasn't one to meddle in anyone's personal life, especially something so private, but at that moment, he felt something new arise inside him, a protective impulse. He didn't know where it came from or why he felt it, but he knew he wanted to ensure Hazel and Ben were okay. As Hazel returned to the playroom, Gray stood still, watching her for a few more moments. Something had changed since her arrival. He was also starting to feel the first signs that the shadows surrounding him might finally begin to lift. The following days were a mix of silence and small gestures that, little by little, began to change the atmosphere in the Westbrook mansion. Ben, now more cheerful, followed her around the house like a little explorer, exuding the confidence that only a secure child could display. Hazel's routine fit so seamlessly that even Maria, the housekeeper, began to smile more, observing the lightness the young woman brought to the environment. One evening, after taking a shower, Gray walked to the living room and found the room filled with laughter. Hazel and Ben were playing on the floor. Gray stopped at the door, unnoticed by anyone. For a moment, he just stood there, watching, feeling a warmth spread in his chest. It had been months since he had seen Ben this happy. Hazel looked up and noticed Gray standing at the entrance. Her smile remained, but her posture became a bit more formal. "Oh, I'm sorry. We were just playing a little before putting Ben to bed." "No problem," Gray replied, his voice softer than he expected. "You both seem to be having fun." Ben ran to his father, eyes shining with joy, and pulled Gray by the hand. "Come on, Dad! Play with us!" Gray hesitated for a moment, but Ben's enthusiasm was hard to resist. He crouched down, sitting beside Hazel, and picked up one of the toy cars on the floor. Hazel smiled, surprised that he had joined in the game. It wasn't something Gray did often, but there, surrounded by Ben's innocent joy and Hazel's gentle presence, he allowed himself to relax. One night, as Hazel was about to leave for her break, Gray found her at the door. "Hazel," he called before she left, "I want to thank you for what you've done for Ben. He's much happier since you've arrived." Hazel, with her usual modesty, just smiled. "Ben is a special boy. He just needs care and attention. Anyone would do the same." Gray shook his head. "No, not just anyone. You've been amazing for him, and in a way, for me too." There was a brief silence between them, a moment where something unspoken lingered in the air. Gray quickly turned away, as if regretting revealing so much, and Hazel respectfully just nodded. She understood Gray's pain, even without knowing all the details. He was a wounded man, and she, in turn, carried her own scars. The next morning, while taking care of Ben, Hazel received another call from an unknown number. A tight knot formed in her stomach, and her face tensed. From a distance, Gray watched and quickly noticed the change. Hazel hurried outside, walking briskly to the yard, and answered the call in a quiet, slightly shaky voice. "I told you not to call me anymore," Hazel whispered, her voice trembling. On the other end was the voice she feared, the controlling and abusive ex-boyfriend she had fled from months ago, once again trying to worm his way back into her life. Gray noticed the panic on Hazel's face as she hung up the phone. He didn't want to intrude, but the way Hazel trembled as she put the phone away left him uneasy. When she came back inside, Gray decided to break his usual silence. "Hazel, is everything okay?" he asked, the concern in his voice palpable, surprising both her and himself. Hazel tried to cover it up, forcing a smile. "Yes, of course, everything's fine." Gray hesitated for a moment before suddenly speaking. "If you need anything," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "Anything at all, let me know." Hazel nodded, grateful but still clearly shaken by the call. Gray didn't press the matter, but as he left her work, a persistent worry gnawed at him. Something inside him had changed. In the weeks that followed, Gray and Hazel began having more intimate conversations. They started sharing small details, little confidences that gradually built a bridge between them. One quiet afternoon, while Ben was napping, Hazel spoke for the first time about her ex-boyfriend. She didn't go into many details, but said enough for Gray to understand that she had been through something serious. "He was very controlling," she said. "At first, it was just jealousy, and then it became unbearable. When I finally managed to leave, I promised myself I'd never let anyone control me like that again." Gray listened in silence, not interrupting. There was a mutual respect between them, an understanding that both carried deep wounds. "No one should live like that," he said finally. "You were brave to leave." Hazel smiled, but her eyes still showed the pain she carried. She whispered. Gray found himself increasingly drawn to her, and perhaps Hazel felt the same. However, both of them knew they were facing their own barriers. Hazel was afraid to love again. The fear of getting hurt made her cautious. Gray, despite developing feelings for her, still clung tightly to the memory of his wife. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the Westbrook house continued to change. Maria, the housekeeper, was becoming more receptive to her presence, admiring Hazel's dedication to Ben and her gentle way of handling everything around her. Even the other staff, like Jane, the cook, and Thomas the gardener, could feel the positive impact of her presence. Gray found himself in a constant internal dilemma. He couldn't ignore how attracted he was to Hazel. The way she smiled, how she talked to Ben, even the delicate way she arranged flowers on the dining room table. Everything about Hazel captivated him. But along with that attraction came a crushing guilt. He still deeply loved his late wife, and the thought of moving on with someone else made him feel as if he were betraying her memory. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Gray and Hazel crossed paths in the mansion's garden. Hazel was sitting on one of the wooden benches, watching Ben play in the distance, and Gray, after an exhausting day at work, decided to join her. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "it's funny how certain things start to feel different over time. This house didn't have this energy before." Hazel looked at him with a soft smile. "Kids have that power, don't they? Ben is special. He brings light where there's darkness." Gray nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Hazel. "It's not just Ben," he said, almost in a whisper. Hazel felt her heart race, but looked away, trying to stay composed. She knew exactly where this conversation could lead, and it scarred her, not because she wasn't interested in Gray, but because the weight of the past still loomed over her, just as it did over him. The days that followed were marked by moments like that. Small flirtations, glances filled with emotions neither of them wanted to admit. Gray began to realize that he was falling for Hazel, but every time those feelings surfaced, he retreated, haunted by the pain of losing his wife. How could he allow himself to love again? Would it be fair to Hazel? Would it be fair to himself? Hazel, on the other hand, began to understand that it wasn't just her affection for Ben that kept her around. Gray was strong and kind, even if he tried to hide those qualities beneath a facade of coldness and distance. However, her own past still haunted her. The calls from her controlling ex-boyfriend had stopped for a few days, but she knew he hadn't given up. Deep down, she feared that if Gray found out about him, he would see her as a weak or damaged by scars that were far from healed. One night, after Ben had already fallen asleep, Gray invited Hazel to a casual dinner in the mansion's dining room. He was nervous, though he tried not to show it. Hazel accepted, knowing it would be an opportunity to talk about the things they both had been avoiding. The table was set simply but elegantly, and the conversation initially revolved around Ben and the household routine. However, after a few minutes, Gray broke the safe pattern of the conversation. "I've never really talked much about her," he said, referring to his wife. "About what happened?" Hazel kept her eyes on Gray, sensing the vulnerability in his words. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she replied gently. "I think I need to," he said, staring at the glass in his hand. "I loved my wife so much, and when she was gone, something inside me broke. I shut down, and for a long time, I believed I would never feel anything for anyone again." Hazel remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "But since you came, I feel something different," Gray confessed, his voice low and hesitant. I feel like I'm betraying her memory by starting to care again, by starting to feel something for you." Hazel's heart raced at his confession. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Gray," she began, "opening your heart to someone new doesn't diminish the love you had for your wife. Love isn't limited, it expands. And I'm also learning to deal with my own past. Sometimes we protect ourselves so much that we forget we also deserve to be happy." Gray looked up, meeting Hazel's gaze. In that moment, the emotional barriers between them began to crumble. The tension that had been building between the two were now more evident than ever, and both were on the verge of giving in to that attraction. However, as Hazel tried to absorb what was happening, her phone vibrated in her purse, interrupting the moment. The name on the screen made her stomach churn. It was her ex-boyfriend. Hazel felt panic rise in her, but quickly silenced the call, trying not to show how much it had shaken her. Gray, who noticed the sudden change in her expression, didn't ask anything, but his protective instincts were on high alert. He knew something was wrong. Something still lingered over Hazel, and maybe she wasn't ready to share it completely yet. Gray knew that soon he might have to face it with her if he truly wanted to be by her side. Days continued to pass. Gray gradually took a more active role in her life, but always with discretion, never overstepping boundaries or forcing any advances. One late afternoon brought a situation that would change the tone between them. Gray decided that Hazel deserved a break, and in an unexpected gesture, prepared dinner for her. It was a simple act, but full of meaning. When Hazel arrived in the kitchen, she found a table set with candles, a carefully chosen wine, and a meal that, although not from a professional chef, showed Gray's attention and effort. "You did all this?" Hazel asked, surprised, her eyes sparkling in the soft candlelight. Gray smiled a bit shyly. "I thought you deserved a worry-free evening. You're always so busy taking care of Ben in the house." Hazel felt warmth rise in her cheeks. It was a small gesture, but full of tenderness. As they dined, their conversation flowed naturally. Gray was more open than he had ever been, sharing details of his life, his fears, and his hopes. Hazel, in turn, began to relax, allowing herself to smile more. The flirting was discreet, but present in every word and every subtle touch. Hazel began to see Gray not only as the dedicated father or the kind of boss, but as a man of worth, someone who made her feel special, desired, and above all, safe. He made her want to believe that it was possible, perhaps, to love again. Gray, for his part, realized he was completely in love with her. Every smile Hazel gave, every delicate gesture she made drew him in more deeply. Gray knew Hazel still carried an emotional weight from her past, and he was willing to wait as long as it took. He wanted her, yes, but he also wanted her to feel ready to take the next steps without fear or doubt. It was during one of those quiet nights that something unexpected happened. Gray was in the living room, going through some work papers, while Hazel was talking with Maria, the housekeeper, about the next day's tasks. Everything seemed peaceful until the sound of a locked knock at the door echoed through the house, interrupting the serene moment. Hazel froze when she heard the voice outside. It was him. Her ex-boyfriend. The air in the room seemed to grow thick, and Gray immediately noticed a change in Hazel's posture. She looked petrified, pale, as if all the fear she had been trying to keep at bay had finally invaded her reality. Gray stood up, his expressions changing rapidly from calm to alert. "Hazel, what's going on?" he asked, his tone firm but filled with concern. Before she could respond, the door was opened by one of the staff, and there he was, the man Hazel had feared encountering, her ex-boyfriend, tall, with an arrogant posture and a gaze that radiated control. He stepped forward, completely disregarding any sense of respect or decency. "Hazel, we need to talk," he said with a cold voice, his eyes fixed on her as if he were in complete control of the situation. Hazel involuntarily recoiled, her body tense and her hands trembling. Gray, who was standing next to her, stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring immediately. He positioned himself between Hazel and the man, his presence strong and imposing, like a shield. "She has nothing to discuss with you," Gray said, his voice firm and authoritative, his eyes never leaving the man's. "I suggest you leave now." Hazel's ex-boyfriend laughed, but it was a humorous laugh. "And who do you think you are telling me what to do?" Gray maintained his stance, his patience wearing thin. "I'm someone who won't let you bother her. She's under my protection, and if you try anything, you'll regret it." There was a moment of tension where it seemed things could escalate to something more violent. But the ex-boyfriend, realizing he had gained nothing from it, muttered something unintelligible and left, slamming the door behind him. Hazel had watched the scene in silence and finally exhaled the breath she had been holding, tears streaming down her face. Gray turned to her, softening his expression. "It's okay now. He's gone," he said, his voice low and reassuring. Hazel looked at him, her eyes still filled with tears. I don't want this to happen. I didn't want you to have to deal with this. I'm sorry." Gray moved closer, his fingers gently caressing her hand. "You don't have to face this alone, Hazel. I'm here whenever you need me." That gesture, that protection Gray offered without hesitation, touched Hazel deeply. There, before her was a man who not only respected her, but made her feel loved and protected in a way she never thought possible again. But at the same time, fear still resided within her. One morning, Gray surprised her by walking into the kitchen while she was talking with Maria about the day's task. With a calm and determined smile, he approached Hazel. "I've been thinking," he began. "Why don't we take the weekend off and get out of here? I have a cabin outside the city, a peaceful place. It might be good for both of us to relax and talk." Hazel, though surprised by the invitation, felt a warmth in her chest. Gray's gaze was kind, and she knew he was offering more than just a simple getaway. He was offering a chance to escape her fears. Without hesitating for too long, she accepted. That weekend, when they arrived in the cabin, a cozy retreat surrounded by trees and far from the chaos of the city, Hazel felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The silence around them seemed to soothe her soul, and Gray's constant protective presence brought a sense of security she never thought possible again. That night, after having dinner together, Hazel and Gray sat by the fireplace, holding glasses of wine. The conversation flowed easily, but soon the topic turned more serious. Gray looked at Hazel, his brown eyes fixed on hers, filled with a strained emotion. "I can't hide what I feel anymore, Hazel," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "Since you came into my life, things have changed. You've brought color back into my world. I know it's hard for you to trust again after everything you've been through, but I need you to know I'm in love with you. I want to be by your side. Not to protect or save you, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Hazel felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this moment would come, but the intensity of Gray's words hit her like a wave. He looked at her with such love, such vulnerability, that she couldn't hold back her tears. Gray wasn't a man who made her feel safe. He made her feel loved in a way she never experienced before. "Gray," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so afraid of getting hurt again. I know you're different, and that you respect and value me, but—" Gray leaned closer, holding her hands in his. "I know, Hazel. I know you're scared, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'll wait for you as long as it takes." His words were like a balm to her wounded heart. Hazel knew in that moment that Gray was not like her ex. He was a good man, a man with integrity who truly loved her. Despite her fear, she realized she no longer wanted to run away. She wanted to love him back, allowing her fears to gradually fade away. Hazel moved closer to Gray, and with a deep sigh whispered, "I'm in love with you too." The smile that formed on Gray's face was pure happiness. He pulled her closer, enveloping her in his arms, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion he had been holding back for so long. It was a kiss filled with emotion, unspoken promises, and sincere love. The weekend at the cabin was a true rebirth for both of them. Gray and Hazel finally allowed themselves to love each other without reservations, without fear. Amid moments of tenderness and passion, they shared stories, laughter, and intimacies that went beyond the physical. Gray was everything Hazel had ever imagined she could have. A man who respected her, loved her for who she was, and never pressured her to be anything but herself. By the end of the night, as they lay side by side, Gray looked at Hazel and said softly, "I never thought I could be happy again after losing my wife. I thought my life would never have color. But you, Hazel, you brought back all the colors I thought I had lost." Hazel, with her heart full, hugged him tightly, feeling a deep gratitude for having found such pure and true love. Back at the Westbrook house, life began to find a new rhythm. Ben, who had always been the link between Gray and Hazel, was happier than ever. His father's smile was constant, and Hazel, who had always been a figure of affection for the boy, was now part of the family in an even deeper way. The house, once filled with shadows, was now full of light and laughter. As for Hazel's ex-boyfriend, he had been definitively removed from her life. With Gray's help and legal measures in place, Hazel could finally breathe easy, knowing he wouldn't torment her anymore. The shadow of her past had been dispelled, and she could now look to the future with hope. And so, Hazel and Gray began their new life together. With Ben by their side, representing a symbol of renewal and hope, the future was bright, full of promises of happiness and all the colors that true love brings. Hey everyone, we've reached the end of another love story. What did you like most about Gray and Hazel's story? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now and leave a like on the video. It helps us a lot. We want to grow this community of romantics more and more. I'll see you in the next story with another exciting romance. Bye!